One question coming over is around this issue of cross-border and international entities. Um, Stephen Weinberg, anything you'd like to add to extra due diligence required when a transaction involves cross-border or international entities? That's a question from one of our participants.
Yeah, look, an international company obviously is more complex. You've got to understand the dynamics of various markets. France is different than US, it's different than Germany, it's different than Spain, et cetera, et cetera. So you really need to have country managers understand the dynamics of their specific geography. As a US parent, you need a very robust foreign currency strategy. You're trading in all sorts of global currencies. So again, that's a dynamic that's changed. And more often than not, international companies are paid bonuses on their US dollar earnings, right? US consolidated US dollar earnings. And oftentimes there are movements in currency that, quite frankly, the management in Europe will get punished for. So I think you have to have eyes wide open on how you incentivize your European operations leaders that they don't pay the price for currency fluctuations that are out of their control. So it adds a lot of complexity, no doubt. Now, all sorts of, obviously, the specific tax issues in each of the various countries in which you're doing business.
Got it. Okay.
I would echo what Steve just said. It's really critical that you have an international tax advisor to understand what the import is. So if you roll over into an entity that's in a foreign jurisdiction, you want to know that when you have an exit, what's the import, what's the net, what are the taxes that are payable? Is there a treaty in place so you don't end up in a situation where you're paying tax abroad but not getting a credit for that tax paid in the US? So it really is important to be speaking with your tax advisor on that.
Another one, I'll put this to Sean. From the seller's point of view, how or what tax recommendations would you have to the seller, let's say the family business, who may have just received the windfall? So I know you're not a tax accountant, Sean, but I'll put this to the panel and maybe starting with you. Any recommendations around a family member that just received the windfall when you're looking at tax recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Because I'm not a tax person, as soon as I get involved in sort of the discussions of a potential liquidity event, down the road, this is before we hire the M&A advisor and so forth, I basically have them sit down. I sit down myself with their, CPA or whoever it might be, and just figure out sort of what's the tax planning up to date. And then we can kind of talk about going forward what they need to take into consideration to maximize, the liquidity that they will receive.
That's another one where you want to start early, because you can take, if you want to do some tax planning and estate planning where you're making gifts of equity to trust for family members, and you want to take advantage of the current valuation at that time, which typically will be less than what you're going to get, a year later, and you have a private equity auction in front of you, you're going to get a very high number, and then it's too late to start doing that estate planning. And that happens quite a bit. So, then the value is locked in. The IRS is going to say you had an offer on the table for X dollars. That's what we're using for purposes of determining these gifts and these transfers. So that's something you want to focus on early on.
Just for you, John, in the same genre, common mistakes you see around integrations. Could you share with us some insight on that?
Yeah, for sure. And it's a good question. And I think, the main problem I see a lot of times is just around, upfront planning and communication across the organization. If you have, a management team and a board who, goes a little bit off the reservation and just buys an asset and doesn't communicate and work with their workforce, work with the business unit leaders and the people that are actually going to do the integration and the implementation, you're off to a rough start, and it's going to be tough to actually have a successful integration and a successful transaction. So I think just having that two-way, communication across the entire organization, and making sure everyone's working together, having good teamwork, and having good focus on integration is really important.
I also find that, teamwork's important, but also with respect to the advisors, having communication between the advisors, between the accountant, the lawyer, and so forth, and having people engaged, you're going to avoid a lot of problems and potential miscommunications.
Yeah, Sean, that goes to that kind of transparency, right? Everyone kind of on the same page, in the boat together, rowing together, right? Those are all critical elements. To me, a kind of takeaway from an integration point of view also is we start thinking about a process. And smaller entities don't have business processes, really well-defined business processes. But if we could have a business process around the integration effort and have control, so I think Johnny made a comment of making sure the two people who head up, let's say AP, are talking to each other. People heading each one of these business units are having those conversations and are dealing with their day-to-day issues, sometimes very tactical, but at least let's get them out in the open. Let's have the conversation about it. So when we move up to the more strategic concerns, because again, hopefully top of the house are talking about more strategic issues, let's get the tactical issues, not be a day 2, day 3, day 100 issue, right? And make sure that we're having those ongoing regular conversations before the deal even closes. And that's transparency. It's like knowing your role, knowing what's going to happen. Steve made the comment a few times about the retention bonuses. Those people need to have retention. They're important to the operation just as much as the leaders of the organization.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and typical titles, I mean, your head of logistics, she should probably have a retention bonus. Your head of IT probably should have a retention bonus, and that retention bonus should be tied to some specific goals about systems working, making sure there's business continuity. So Russ, dead on retention bonuses matter to frontline people who really help run the business. Another question, it looks like for Sean, maybe we'll pull the camera back a little bit. Sean, the thinking, are there any trends or anything, up to the minute now post-COVID in terms of mergers and acquisitions and family businesses that you're seeing from where you sit?
The big one for me is basically a lot of family businesses who were, scared or fearful of what would happen during COVID, have done an amazing job at cutting costs and have actually come through it in a much better situation. Many of them had thought to themselves, I plan to sell the business within a year or so. And now they're saying to me, well, with valuations the way they are, we've done so great, we'll sell the business in maybe a year or 18 months. And the reality is the capital's there, private equity and family office and so forth. That's not the concern. The concern is you're going to have this massive amount of liquidity and sales of businesses. And how many quality teams can you put together in terms of the accounting, the lawyers, the bankers, and so forth. So my recommendation to them or advice is basically get to know and figure out who your team of advisors are going to be, figure that out, and also start getting your house in order because it's going to be an interesting next 18 months to 2 years.
Here's a question could go probably to Russ and myself in terms of, if we're going to drop in a CFO or an IT leader, the question is, how long might that leader stay in place? We provide fractional, Freeman Clark provide fractional or part-time CIO CTOs. We like to consider it part-time long-term. So the answer for us would be as long as it takes, until which time is it we can replace ourselves in that organization and help recruit our replacement as a CTO or CIO. That would be how we would approach it. Russ, how about you? If you're putting an interim or part-time financial person in, how long does that person generally stay?
Yeah, they're usually it's at least a 6-month window that we've seen, and usually we have Answer Executive Network. Steve Mandel kind of runs that for us, and in that group, I think it's critical to identify what do we want it to be kind of long term, and as we have that long term vision about this, we said earlier during the call about do we have the right people in line and on the team. If we don't, let's make sure that we do going forward. And either it's the PE groups and others can bring their folks, but I think ultimately it's the long-term decision of let's make sure we have the right individual here who can help take this company from here to the next level. And that's ultimately, that 6-month window is just keeping the seat warm open in my mind. It's on a much longer window to kind of get to the company to the next level.
Yeah, it looks like a follow-up to that, Russ. Do you generally, when you and Steve are looking at your talent pool, do you go for a specific industry, let's say a consumer, finance, insurance, or legal, when you're thinking of who would be the best fit people-wise? Do you look for that industry-specific experience, or is a solid financial experience that's good enough?
No, I think industry, information is critical to success. I mean, otherwise you want them going into an organization and they have to sit and learn not just the organization, but also that particular industry segment. Having the industry segment knowledge is incredibly important. So at least when they have to get the blocking and tackling of their accounting and finance operation up to speed, they have the industry knowledge already in place. And I think that to me is, a critical element to, the success. And I think that's, when Steve and his team kind of go through this process, it allows the organization to say, hey, this is what we're looking for. Find me someone like this, whoever it may be.
Sean, I'll address this to you. Is there a best practice around employee communication? We talked a lot about that with Adam today. Employee communication, that a company is being purchased by a PE firm. Is there best practice around that communication to the entire employee group? I'll ask you first.
And I mean, we've used this word and Russ has as well, but transparency, in as much as it's necessary for the employees to know. You don't want them to find out the last minute. I mean, every company's walls have eyes, so they're going to notice guys in suits walking around. Just let them know at different stages once things have been determined, what's happening, as opposed to, at the very end of the day, oh, this is a situation, this is a sale, it's going to happen within the next month. Because likely, if you don't communicate it to them, people are going to start making up their own stories or things in their head, and it could affect the operations of the business.
Steve Weinberg, you agree with that basically that approach?
100%. Look, the old days, you wouldn't communicate at all, right? And now you can't communicate enough. Remember, people are scared, they're worried about their jobs. You just got to be very open and upfront. And quite frankly, say, look, you may lose your job in all of this, but we're going to help you during the transition, et cetera, et cetera. So again, people know what's going on. As Sean said, there are a lot of blue suits walking around the office. So people know that what's going on. You've got to over communicate. You've got to keep doing it. And frankly, just can't do it enough.
I think that's the right point is they know what's going on. It's a much different world today than it was 20 years ago, right? And because of that, and whether or not it's in the offices or online or whatever, we all are inundated with information, and each employee is going to say, well, how's it affect me, right? That's what they really care about. Not that they don't care about the whole company, but they really, how's it affect me? And if you're upfront and honest and transparent with them, it's going to ease their transition going forward. And I'll say the thing is, people don't stay around in organizations long time like they used to. I think that's also something that doesn't really play into, the long-term strategy, because, years ago, people stayed 10, 20 years in an organization. Now, 2, 3, 4 years, they've moved on to the next place and the next place. And that's, it's a different structure today than it was, many years ago.
When we sold Rainier to Perigo, we knew that the integration was going to be about 18 months. So the planning had started, it was going to be an 18-month integration, and we debated internally of what to communicate. And we gave everybody sort of the cold, hard facts. There were certain groups that will not have jobs after 18 months, back office, supply chain, et cetera. And we set these groups down and said, here's what's going to happen. In 18 months, we won't have a spot for you. Here will be your potential severance package. However, we've got 18 months to figure this out, to find a home for you. And at the end of the day, I was shocked how appreciative they were, that they got a lot of heads up on what's coming. And we found, spots for about 90% of those folks. So again, it was a fascinating conversation with the leadership team on what to do and how to do it. And again, as I said, you can't communicate enough. Even the hard.
Hard conversations are yeah, I mean, I know even one of the groups I was in, we were being acquired, and I kind of made it my goal. I wanted to make sure every one of my staff got a job before I got a job. That was my key mindset. And there was one person I was a little worried about about that happening, but ultimately, you know, I was able to get him an opportunity as well, and just to make sure everyone was settled. And again, it was communication. It was, how can I help you? Let's move this process forward. I knew I was being taken care of, but not all of them were. And let's, you know, again, being, you know,
Unknown is always the scariest part.
absolutely.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.